Salvete, everyone. Salvete omnes. Hello, everyone. That's fine. Anyway, hello. Thank you for joining me again today. We're going to continue our attack of Britain. We finally made landfall. And now we've got to deal with the Britons that are there. So we pick up in Book 4, Section 27. So let's just dive right in. Hostes prole superati, similatque se ex fuga receperunt, statem ad Caesarem legatos de pace miserunt. Obsides esse daturos quaequem perasset facturos polliciti sunt. So, we almost have an ablative absolute at the beginning. It looks like an ablative absolute is not because this is nominative. So we've just got a noun and a participle, but they are the subject of the sentence rather than kind of it's both a summary of the previous section, but also, since it's the subject, its function as the subject of the sentence takes priority. So, the enemies, having been conquered in battle, as soon as they say ex fuga receperunt, as soon as they literally recovered themselves from flight, all right, so as soon as they kind of retreated, immediately they sent to Caesar and Caesar. They sent to Caesar legates. They sent ambassadors, emissaries about peace or concerning peace. De here meaning more about or concerning rather than down from. So they sent legates of peace, ambassadors. They sent and polliciti sunt. They promised, deponent verb, they promised that, we're going to get indirect statement here, they promised that obsides esse daturos and quaem perasset facturos. Now, we don't have any actual infinitives here for our indirect statement, but for that we just put esse after our participles. So we've got our future active participle here, we put esse after it, and we get our infinitive. And it's quite frequent for the form esse to be left out of an infinitive, or just really of a sentence. So we'll see this a lot in Caesar, we'll see this a lot in Virgil, where you just have to kind of supply the form of esse to complete the sentence. So they promised that they, the enemy, would give hostages, and they would do quae imperasset, they would do what he had commanded. So we're sorry that we didn't let you land on our shore. Forgive us. We'll send over hostages, and we'll do whatever you say. All right. Una cum his legatis comias atribus venit, cum super demonstraveram a Caesar in Britanniam primissum. All right. Una cum, a phrase meaning together with. Technically, it's a long A, una, so it's like in one group with them. So una cum his legatis, so together with these ambassadors that the enemy sent. Comias atribus came, so he came with these legates. Comias atribus, whom supra demonstraveram, whom I had mentioned above. And so literally, in this case, we could actually literally scroll up on the page and find out where he mentioned him. But yeah, Caesar just pointing out, it's like look, I mentioned Comias Atribus before, and he is reappearing. It's very interesting, though, that Caesar uses the first person here. Usually, and we'll see it. We'll see it in 28, demonstratum est. He uses the passive here. It was mentioned above. And for whatever reason, he says, I mentioned, and Caesar almost never uses the first person to describe himself. Certainly never as a general. It's always Caesar ordered the troops to do this, never I ordered the troops. And even when he's talking as a narrator, he rarely, if ever, uses the first person. Obviously here, but this might be the only case we'll see where he uses the first person when he's talking about Caesar. So and I don't know why. Slip of the pen. He wanted to do a first person, or a third person, but he forgot that he wasn't himself. I guess I don't know. Command subjects came, whom I had mentioned above, and then you get indirect statement, whom had been sent primissum esse, once again supply esse, had been sent by Caesar, by Caesar, into Britain. So, Comes Attribus had been sent as probably an ambassador himself. We will actually find this out on the next sentence. And the Britons didn't treat him like an ambassador, right? You don't shoot the messenger sort of thing. Well, they didn't really respect that. All right. Hunc illi e navi aggressum, cum ad eos oratoris modo Caesaris mandata deferet, comprehenderant, atque invincula conjecerant. Tum, pro leo facto, remiserunt, et in petenda pace eis re culpam in multitudinem contulerunt, et propter imprudentiam ut ignoscaretur peti verunt. So, lots of pronouns. Let's sort these out. So, this guy, this is referring to Comes Attribus, this singular masculine thing that I've mentioned recently. So, Mrs. Attribus. This guy, they, that is the enemy, did something. Illy, here's the subject. It's thrown into the beginning of the sentence. Really, it's this guy, having exited from the boat. Cum here. Cum with a subjunctive. We got a couple options, right? It could just be a cum clause when he was bringing Caesar's orders to them in the manner of a speaker. So you could just say when or while. You could say since. It could be causal. It could be adversative. Although he was bringing Caesar's orders to them in the manner of a speaker, he's not coming as a general. He's not coming as any sort of hostile party. He's coming simply as a messenger. So I think cum here is probably best translated as although. You're not wrong to say when, but and I think we mentioned this before. You can vary your translation of cum a little bit depending upon how it's going with the sentence. So they, the enemy, comprehenderant this guy. They seized this guy, having gotten out of the boat, even though he was bringing the messages or the commands, the orders of Caesar to them in the manner of an orator, of a speaker. They seized him, they apprehended him, and they threw him into chains. So they have arrested him, and they have, I guess, thrown him in jail. They've bound him. Then, with the battle done, pro leo facto, they sent him back. And in petenda pace, in seeking peace, so in the act of peace being sought, I'm just going to say put here in this case. They placed the blame of this matter upon the multitude, upon kind of the mob. And on account of their lack of good sense, on account of their imprudence, they sought that it be forgiven. So, kind of a mob mentality is going on here, and so that's what they are blaming. Comes Attribus gets off the boat. Somebody's like, he's got a sword or whatever, and everyone's like, enemy, grab him. And so, like, you just get this mob mentality that takes over, and they arrest him. And then they're like, well, crap. We probably shouldn't have done that if he's just a messenger. Well, if we beat Caesar, we won't have to worry about it. And then they lost. And then they're like, that was the mob that did that. Sorry. So, ut ignoscaretur, indirect command, right? They ask that it be forgiven. So, forgiven? As a command here. So, So let's carry on. Caesar, questus quod cum ultro incontingentem legatis missis pacem abse petisent, bellum sine causa intulisent, ignoscere se imprudentiae dixit, obsides qua imperavit. Quorum illi partem statum dederunt, partem ex longinquioribus locis arcesitam paucis diebus sese daturos dixerunt. Caesar questus, he complained. Deponent verb, so active, so having complained. Having complained, and I think, quote here, you could say it's just that. Having complained about which thing, or having complained about that. And then we get all the things he complained about. Even though, I'm going to go with even though, or although with the cum here. Even though they sought peace from him with messengers, appellative absolute, with messengers sent onto the continent, that is, onto like the continent as we imagine it, right? Europe from the island. With messengers sent onto the continent, ultra, kind of voluntarily, right, from like their side, on their part. So since they, on their part, on their own choice, sent or sought peace from him, Caesar, with these messengers sent to the continent, and complained that they had brought war, they had kind of started a war without cause. He said that he forgives them. Say ignoscere, that he forgives the imprudentiae. He forgives their imprudence. Imprudentiae genitive here. He forgives them of their imprudence. Forgives them for their imprudence? Maybe it's a dative. I don't know. I should know better if I'm making videos on YouTube, right? Your book should have a note at the bottom. So, but he's forgiving them for their imprudence. And, he ordered hostages, which is what they said they were going to do, right? So, having complained that they had started a war without cause, even though they had sent, or they had sought peace from him with messengers sent on the continent of their own volition. I'll forgive you. Fine, I won. We'll let bygones be bygones. I'll take 500 hostages. Quorum illi, of which, referring to the hostages here, of which they gave part immediately. It's like, oh, you need 500 slaves or hostages? Sure. Here's 200. So they give part of them immediately, and part of the hostages, a section of the hostages, they said that they would give. So, se daturos dixerunt. Indirect statement, right? They said that they would give them daturos esse. They said they would give part having been summoned ex longinquioribus locis. They would give part having been summoned from the farther locations, from the more remote locations. They would give those paucis diebus in a few days. So yeah, we'll take care of the hostages. Here's 200 right now, or however many. Right? I don't know how many he's ordered, but here's 200 right now. We'll get the others to you in a few days. We've got to go get them. We can't just hand over an entire village, right? So the hostage situation, basically, you just kind of like turn over some of your citizens to him. And usually it's not just like you're giving him like the criminals and the slaves. Normally it's like, here's like the sons of chieftains and other high-ranking people. So like you're not going to have enough in just like the nearby town. So you are going to have to give some. You're going to have to spread out where you're getting these hostages from. So they would give them in a few days. In terrea, suos in agros remigrare userunt, principes quondiqua convenira et se civitates qua suas caesare commendare coiperunt. Meanwhile, they ordered their own men, Suos, that is the Britons, right? The Britons ordered their people to remigrate, to go back into the fields. So you kind of had this like militia idea where everybody like comes out from the countryside and whatnot and defends the beach. It's like, all right, everybody go back to your homes. So they just kind of go back into their fields, go back into their kind of lands. Perhaps you could look at it that way. And they koiperunt. They began to do a couple of infinitives. They began, or I guess I should say, the principes began. The chieftains began to convene from all sides. They began to gather from everywhere. So they began to convene from all sides. And the chieftains began to entrust to Caesar, to hand over to Caesar their themselves, say, and their cities, their states. So Caesar wins. They ask for forgiveness for the way they treated Comius Atribus. He says, sure, but you owe me hostages. They give him hostages. They tell their men, all right, everybody disperse, go back home. There's no more fighting to be done. The chieftains come for a council, basically, so they start to come together to meet with Caesar, and they begin to give Caesar control over themselves and over their states. So, well done, Caesar. One successful beach landing, and he rules all of Britain. Well, not all of Britain. He rules, like, this little swath of it. All right. We'll do one more. Work our way through 28, since it's relatively short, and it starts a fantastic part. It'll give us nice... it'll make the next section want to be seen even more, because 29 is amusing. So, 28. His rebus pace confirmata, post diem quartem quames in Britanniam ventum naves duodewigenti, de quibus super demonstratum est, quae equite sustulerant ex superiore portuleni vento solverunt. So, ablative absolute, this is your ablative absolute with an ablative of means. So, with peace confirmed or affirmed or established by these things, and everything we mentioned up in 27, time is weird. Basically, the fourth day after they came to Britain. Let's break this down. After the fourth day, or like the fourth day later than, the fourth day after which, est in Britanniam ventum, it was come into Britain. Caesar taking an intransitive verb, venio, and making it passive. And really, you can only make transitive verbs passive usually, at least in English. But Caesar's making an impassive verb of venio, so literally just it was come into Britain. You can just say they came into Britain, right? So 4 days after they came to Britain, naves duodeviginti, 18 ships. Now, this is not the subject of ventum est, right? Ventum est is singular, it's neuter because of ventum. So we have something about these 18 ships. We're not quite sure what to do with them. Let's find out. They could be subject, they could be the object, right? So 18 ships, about which supra demonstratum est, and here's this phrase again, right? About which it was mentioned, demonstratum est, about which it was mentioned above. Same exact pattern here, but instead of about which I mentioned above, about which it was mentioned above. He suddenly goes back into a passive structure here. About which it was mentioned above. The ships which had carried the equites, which had carried the cavalry, solverunt, they set sail. I guess you could say they loosened, they released themselves. from the higher port, I think it's the northern port, or is it the northern port or is it the southern port? Because everything's with relation to Rome, so it's higher up, so it's closer to Rome. So they set from the more southern port in a Lenny Wento. I believe your book should have, if you're using the Mueller, you should have a nice map showing this, which is helpful. And to do it at the very beginning. Yeah. So you've got, I think you've got a map on page 46. So they were sent from a higher port in a gentle breeze, in a light wind. So it looks like Nawis is the subject. The ship's kind of released or set sail from the higher port in a light wind. Quae cum ad propinquarent Britanniae et ex castris viderentur, tanta tempesta subito coorta est, ut nulle orum cursum tenera posset, sed aliae eodem unde erant profectae referentur, aliae ad inferiorem partem insulae, quae est propria soles occasum, magno suo cum periculo de icerentur. Quae tamen ancoris iactis cum fluctibus complerentur, necessario adversa nocte, in altum provecta continentem petierunt. Look at that sentence. Chunky boy. Punctuation to punctuation. Comma to comma. So, let's look at this first clause. Which ships, quae, ships are feminine, so that'll help kind of keep things in order when we're looking at pronouns and whatnot. Which ships, cum ad propinquarent Britanniae, when they were approaching Britain, I think this is just a simple when. When they were approaching Britain, Britain is dative because of ad propinquarent. A propinquarent, you approach a dative. So they were approaching to Britain. So when they were approaching Britain and when they were seen from the camps, so they are so close to the shore that you can actually see them from the camps. When that was going on, tanta tempestas, such a tempest, such a storm suddenly arose, coorta est, deponent verb, such a storm suddenly arose that, and we get a result clause after tanta, such a result that none of those boats, right, and again, feminine, so none of the boats were able to hold their course. They were not able to kind of make their way to the island, right? But some boats, alii, were carried back, referentur, passive. They were carried back to the same place, eodem, from edem, meaning the same. This is meaning the same place. They were carried back to the same place, and then you get this, it's a relative clause with unde, to the same place, from where they had set out. And this is a deponent verb. So, lots of deponents and passives floating around. Look at that. So, coorta est, it arose, and then referentur, an actual passive, and then perfecti erant, another deponent. So, such a storm arose that none of them could hold their course. So, none of these ships are able to reach their destination. But some of them were carried back to the same place, to the same port, from which they had set out. And others, deicerentur, were cast down, were thrown down, or just kind of, in this case, sent, whatever you want a storm to do. They were sent ad inferiorem partem insulae, to an inferior part of the island, not in terms of quality, just in terms of like latitude or whatever. They were sent to a lower part of the island, which, and this is referring to partem, which is propius, which is closer, nearer the falling of the sun. So it's western, right? If you're looking at the screen, western. So which was closer to the falling of the sun. Propius is the comparative form of it's essentially the comparative of the preposition prope. Prope, near, propius, nearer. Proxime, closest. So they were sent to a lower part of the island, which is closer to the west, or we would say like farther west, but he says closer to the setting of the sun. And they were thrown down there. They were sent down there. Magnosuo cum periculo. They were sent with great danger, like with their own great danger. So we would say like with great danger to themselves, but in this case, suo is control. It's possessing this danger. So with their own great danger, but it means great danger to themselves. All right. And then we continue, we go back to talking about the boats. Which boats, however, with their anchors cast, anchoris iactis, absolute, with their anchors cast, they were being filled. Let me think real quick. They were being filled with waves. I want that to be cum fluctibus. Is it cum complerentur? Since they were being filled by waves? That makes more sense, I think. I think cum makes better sense with a subjunctive here, and that explains why that is a subjunctive. Because these are all result clauses, right? So these are all result. Such a storm arose that result was they were not able, and they were carried back, and they were sent down. However, I don't think this is a result clause. I don't think such a storm arose that with the anchors cast down they were. So I don't think we're still in the result clause, and the semicolon would suggest that we're not. So, which boats, however, with their anchors cast, since they were being filled with waves, by necessarily, adversa nocte, ablative of time when, / ablative absolute, with night being adverse, with night facing them. So with night coming on is the idea, right? So with night approaching, they sought the continent, so they headed back for Gaul, having been carried in altum, having been carried into the deep. So they're not close to the shore, they're not close to the island where it's going to be shallower waters and perhaps safer to navigate. They're being carried out into the deep, and so they've got to sail for the continent. And it's not necessarily the safest thing to do that nocte at night, but necessario. They've got no other choice. It's either get swept out to sea and never heard from again, or risk some nighttime sea travel and make your way back to the continent. So that is where we will leave off with this video. Romans just can't catch a break when it comes to Britain. It took them forever to land. They finally did, but Caesar didn't have his horses. So alas, the one thing that failed him kept him from taking over the entire island. And then once he gets there, he has some successful negotiations. He finally gets his messenger back, right? He gets Commius back. But then, these horses, they just will never reach the island. All right, so there we go. So thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions, as always, you can throw those in the comments. You can ask me in class. You can email me. Whatever works. And with that, I will see you next time. While later.